Welcome to SciTrek, your sci-fi TV and movie channel. So I told you last week in a very short video while I was on my holidays that Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, who are the chairman of the motion pictures for MGM and the motion picture group president, basically the two top people for MGM motion pictures in particular, but they really are the top two executives, have resigned. But they didn't really as much resign as get pushed out. Mike Hopkins, who is a big executive for Amazon, released a statement not long afterwards saying that basically their departure has paved the way for MGM to be merged and to become a part of Amazon and Amazon Pictures. Amazon had been making lots and lots of promises. They'd been promising that there would be no job losses, that there would be an element of independence stayed within MGM. The MGM would be able to continue to make its own business arrangements and continue to do projects that it wants to do. That basically Amazon were just going to act like a parent company and they weren't going to interfere too much with what MGM wanted to do. So what's changed? Well, Mike Hopkins, in other statements this week, has blamed the pandemic. Of course he's blamed the pandemic, because why wouldn't you? He's basically said that in 2000, when this deal began, they had no clue that we were about to go through a pandemic that would basically shut down the entire film industry for 12 months. And that's a fair comment. None of us knew that was going to happen, obviously, but it did. That has had a massive financial impact. However, initially Amazon and all of the other streaming services actually did very well out of the pandemic because we weren't allowed to go out, so we stayed home. We all booked onto Amazon Prime. Netflix had a massive spike. HBO Max in the US had a massive spike. All of these streaming services, Disney Plus, for example, really enjoyed the bump from the fact that none of us were allowed out. Well, the growth of all of these streaming services has slowed significantly. And actually Amazon, again, who had a massive spike in business early on in the pandemic because we weren't allowed to go to shops, so we bought everything off Amazon, stopped. And their actual sale price and their share price has plummeted quite significantly in the last few months. Why did Amazon buy MGM? So if we just quickly talk about that, and then I'm going to explain to you what is actually going on here. Because Amazon or MGM isn't quite the company I thought it was. In 1948, there was a big legal case in the United States. It's called the Paramount case. All the big studios had big chains of theaters. Those chains and theaters that it owned, either it owned or through deals, only showed their movies. So MGM had a series of these theaters, Paramount did, Disney did, and so on and so on. The Supreme Court ordered that was actually against fair play rules and ordered them to separate. Now, this impacted MGM significantly because actually one of the original owners of MGM was a theatre owner. He owned a lot of theatres. Over the next 10 years and 15 years as well, television became very popular and everyone started watching TV instead, and that really ended the golden age of cinema. So all of the big studios had a decision to make. Warner Brothers actually expanded their studio lots, but they started making TV shows and they started renting out studio space. Disney doubled down and they spent a lot of their money on the Disney World, Disneyland, and created the brand through that. And they also really heavily invested into television. MGM didn't, but they sold Culver Studios and they sold a lot of it to real estate. They built a lot of housing. And what was left, they sold to Sony Pictures in 68, I think it was, sorry. So Sony Pictures now own that studio and it's still Sony Pictures Studios today. MGM took that money and they started the casino chain. So they built the MGM Grand and things like this, and they really invested heavily in that area. When they then went on in the 80s to have further financial problems, the studio part of MGM and the resort side of MGM got separated. So they're now two completely different entities. MGM Resorts is still owned by the company that bought them back then. MGM Studios and all of the related companies to that is now owned by Amazon. I always assumed Amazon was buying MGM because of the studios, because Amazon Movies doesn't have its own studios. It produces movies through partnerships with other studios. It rents space from Warner Brothers. It rents space at Pinewood Studios and things like this. So I thought it was investing in a studio company, and an old-fashioned studio that actually land and actually somewhere to actually produce films. It's not true. They don't. Amazon were always very clear that the main reason they were buying MGM was for the intellectual properties. It's the stuff MGM owns. It's all the movies and TV shows and things like this. It owns the intellectual rights to those. Actual buildings MGM owns is very limited. I always assumed, at very least, it owned the 007 stage studio at Pinewood Studios. It doesn't. It's only named the 007 stage because traditionally that's where the Bond films are made. And it was actually built for The Spy Who Loved Me. It's one of Europe's and one of the world's largest sound stages. The MGM as an entity is really virtual. There are no nuts and bolts. There are no buildings. It's people, basically, and not many of them. So Amazon, when they bought MGM, they were just really buying the name. They were just buying the brand. Now, early on, they promised that they were going to invest in that brand, allow it to expand. Stargate is relevant to that because that was a big part of this 3-point plan that they wanted to run with. Bond, Stargate, and then starting looking at the intellectual properties and hoping to bring back some of those projects. They did lie. Or that's how the MGM employees now feel anyway. And the MGM employees and sources that I speak to, they feel like they've been lied to. And they're now very worried that actually MGM as an entity is purely going to be absorbed into Amazon Pictures, that their headquarters will be closed and so on and so on. And that actually Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdy, who were standing up against this and were pushing back against Amazon and maybe trying to get them to follow through some of their promises, were forced out because of this new plan that they're blaming on the pandemic. MGM employees are furious. Apparently, Michael DeLuca, the motion picture thing, is going to be walking and moving over to Warner Brothers. And apparently he put feelers out to Warner Brothers anything up to a year ago. So even when he was telling MGM employees through memos not to worry, he was already looking for his way out and already looking for his next job. So he saw this coming. Stargate, as I say, it just means we're going to have to wait a bit longer. And it really puts at threat whether the vision of Brad Wright is going to be allowed to continue, because that's been done with MGM. That's been planned for, and all the work has been done with MGM. The people at the MGM headquarters in Beverly Hills, those people may not be in jobs much longer. If you are a regular SciTrekker, you'll know that I have a few sources that work in and around MGM. This all started back when I first started SciTrek 9 months ago, where I did a video that actually turned out to be wrong, but did get like nearly 100,000 views. Somebody from MGM, or actually a company that works closely with MGM, emailed me saying this story's wrong, told me why. I started a conversation with them. Through that person, I've now built up a bit of a network of 12 people that either work for MGM or work for companies with MGM. This person originally introduced me to them and has really helped me to get stories to you and to understand what is going on, not just with MGM, but with the wider film industry, and it's been absolutely invaluable. About an hour ago, I got my first message from one of those sources, basically saying that Amazon today, or through MGM, have announced that anybody on short-term contracts with MGM will not be having their contracts renewed. A couple of people since then have emailed me, at least one person I actually talk to regularly, saying that their contract has not been renewed and they've been put on immediate, I think they called it garden leave. This is not something I've ever come across myself. I don't work in the public sector sort of thing. I've worked public sector, so this doesn't exist for my industry. But basically saying that their contract isn't being renewed. They've got 3 months left on this contract, but they're to leave now. And the last message I had off them, just a second, I haven't had anything else off them, but the last message I had off them was basically they had a security guard stood on their shoulder and they were clearing their desk. Sounds very aggressive to me, but apparently this is quite common. They deal with sensitive information and they're not to remove any of it. So they're going to be paid for the last 3 months, but they are leaving now. So this has come as not necessarily a shock, but it's making me sad. These people that I speak to have basically become close to, I've been friendly with them. I speak to them 2 or 3 times a week. To know that they're having to go through this does make me a little sad. It breaks my heart a little bit. The one person I've spoken to has already said they knew this would come in. They've already had an offer from another big studio. They're a creative. I won't say too much about them, but they work in the creative side of things. And apparently, a lot of the people that work on the creative side of things, doing CGI work or get on the computers and do all that business, they're all on reasonably short-term contracts because depending on what MGM are doing, what projects are going, depends on what skills they need, and that varies. So they don't put these people on permanent contracts. They tend to, the numbers go up and down depending on what they're up to. So he's been thinking about this for a while. He knew his contract probably wouldn't be renewed, so he's already had an offer from another studio. For me, that's great news because now I've got an insight to that studio. So from a very completely selfish point of view, I go, yay. Amazon, I believe, had no intention of keeping MGM in its current form. They were always going to gut it and just absorb it. Actually, one of the Amazon executives, that's what he called it. He said, we're going to absorb MGM into Amazon Prime and Amazon Studios. All they wanted was the IP. All they wanted was the rights to all these classic movies and TV shows that MGM owns. Things like Rocky, Creed, RoboCop, I think, which is looking like, also might be looking for another TV series as well, or a movie. Things like 2001: A Space Odyssey, things like Forbidden Planet, things like Stargate and James Bond. That's all they were interested in. They wanted those rights, and now they've got them. And MGM will basically only be MGM in name. There will actually be no substance. There'll be no buildings. There'll be no it'll just be in name.